Parliament may be prorogued for another 2 weeks, but it's already shaping up to be a busy political season, from managing a global pandemic.
We are all still living in an emergency.
To a new Conservative leader.
We will show all Canadians that we are a government in waiting.
This minority government will soon be put to the test with a speech from the throne and a confidence vote, all while the Prime Minister still faces his own ethics investigation.
So how is the government and the opposition positioning itself? It's Thursday, and At Issue is officially back, although you could say we never really left. Chantal Hébert, Andrew Coyne, and Althea Raj. It was a particularly busy summer. But let's turn our attention to what we are expecting this fall. I want to do one go-round, if I can, on the latest WE controversy, the charity announcing it's going to shut down its operations in Canada. And just in terms of where that leaves this whole issue, does it change anything in terms of the politics of it? Andrew, I'll start with you.
Very little, I would think. It certainly shows what dire shape the charity was in prior to this whole mess erupting. And that, of course, is part of the key claims and arguments made by the opposition on this, that basically the WE people came to the government with whom they had very tight connections and looked for a bailout, looked for a lifeline. So that question still remains, and all of the questions remain about who knew what and the degree to which the Prime Minister recused himself or didn't recuse himself. These questions have not gone away at all.
Chantal, do you think it substantively changes anything, or just sort of brings it back to the fore?
Neither. It is where it was. I suspect the conversation is changing for a good reason, and not because that the government is so devious. But I don't think that this week's news does much of anything one way or another.
Well, particularly, Althea, when people are worried about getting their kids to school, there are flare-ups of the virus in different parts of the country. I wonder how the opposition keeps it moving, or if they can.
Well, I would actually say it adds a little bit more fuel to the fire, because I think that it re-energizes in some ways the opposition parties. I think the government had been quite successful in kind of changing the channel with, let's talk about the speech from the throne and all these things that we plan on doing. And then here comes like the ghosts of the very recent past. And if anything, I think it also opens the Liberals up to saying, hey, We Charity, and before that, what it was known as Free the Children, was a very highly reputable charity, and the Liberals may have contributed to the downfall of a well-regarded Canadian not-for-profit.
Okay, let's turn to the fall and how people are sort of positioning themselves, either on the government side or the official opposition. We'll leave it to that for now. How important a moment in time is this going to be, Andrew, the throne speech and sort of the build-up around it?
Hugely important from the sounds of it. The government seems to have made a decision that they can essentially borrow in unlimited amounts because the money is free, because interest rates are so low. So if the leaks and the spin that we've been hearing ahead of time are in any way indicative of what they're planning, they're not satisfied with a deficit that is now in the neighborhood of $400 billion, unheard of, unprecedented by orders of magnitude beyond any deficit we've ever experienced in the past, and they want to go further, with the important difference that the deficit that they ran up until now was one to do with the crisis, with keeping people alive, keeping the lights on through this extraordinary crisis. The types of programs they're talking about now are completely different. They're discretionary programs. They're ideas the Liberals have for the ways in which they'd like to change society, change the way the economy is run. And I'm not sure people who might have signed on to those earlier emergency deficits are going to be quite as happy to see them going further into debt for much more discretionary reasons.
Yeah, I mean, the Prime Minister has said this will change the direction of the country and the country's economy. Is there an appetite for that, Chantal? Surely the government would be thinking about that.
Surely the government has to be thinking that there's an appetite out there for stability or a return to some semblance to normal. So if they're planning to use this to have a campaign on change, I'm not sure there's an appetite out there. But to go back to the change in the conversation, I do believe that the speech from the throne has already changed the conversation. And I base that, for instance, on Erin O'Toole's speech to caucus this week. It wasn't a speech of official opposition lamenting prorogation, the absence of Parliament, the WE scandal, but it was about how the Conservatives are getting ready to present an alternative to the government rather than an addition for official opposition. So on that basis, I'm not sure that the Liberals are the only ones that want to change the channel from we charity. I think it's to the advantage of the Conservatives to be highlighting their alternative to the Liberals.
Yeah, that's a smart observation, Althea, and it's probably beneficial in the long game for Erin O'Toole to do that.
Absolutely. I think the speech from the throne is basically an opportunity for the Conservatives, as much as the Liberals, to present an alternative vision of what they want the public to see their party support. And we've seen Erin O'Toole actually say that there may be things in the speech from the throne that his Conservative Party chooses to support. And there's been an openness there that, frankly, has been unusual in the last couple of years in Ottawa. So if the speech from the throne lives up to what the government has billed it to be, then it will be a fundamental rethink of the way Ottawa is engaged in society. And that is an opportunity for the Conservatives, because we see in public opinion polls, Nano's had a poll this week in Bloomberg, basically saying that Canadians are split. In fact, most Canadians are not in favor of larger deficits and bigger spending. And so here is a golden opportunity for the Conservatives to present a very distinct vision for their party.
Although it's happening, Andrew, at a time when Erin O'Toole is also saying, well, I'll worry about the deficit, or I'll deal with it in 10 years, which is also sort of a strange thing to hear from a Conservative, and something that fiscal Conservatives may be uncomfortable with.
Yeah, I mean, I'd like to see a faster timetable than that, but he's been dealt a very difficult hand. We've got deficits now that are heading towards 20% of GDP. Even if a substantial chunk of that is taken out next year, one hopes, because of the emergency programs coming to an end, you still have deficits of unheard of size, and those cannot be responsibly done in 2 or 3 years. It is going to take longer than anyone would prefer, perhaps, from a fiscally conservative standpoint. So I don't fault him for that. I think there's an enormous opportunity, as Chantal and Althea said. Basically, the center ground has been opened up with the Liberals moving so far left. That's why I'm a little disturbed to see him mouthing rhetoric about Canada first and self-sufficiency and being protectionist in various ways. I guess going after an NDP voter, I think that's going to muddy his pitch considerably and confuse voters who want to know what a Conservative Party stands for.
Last word, I think, probably to you, Chantal. Surely there's an opportunity here for the government too, though. I take everyone's smart points about the Conservatives, but there is a chance here for the government to sort of reaffirm or reinvent its mandate.
Up to a point, but there's also a very tight rope to walk on. It will be revealing of what their sense is of where Canadians are at, the tone and the way that they sell this strong speech. I don't think they've done so far a very good job of preparing for it, and they've let others define that strong speech. We'll see if in the end that pays off, in the sense that people will say, well, it's a lot more responsible than we expected. But I do think that voters are going to look for a sense that they want a government that comes across as responsible to handle the way forward. And on that basis, the we charity scandal has already done its damage.
Some are asking around whether this government will have any fiscal anchor moving forward. It had been debt to GDP ratio. I'm not sure whether it's still going to be that, whether they'll put parameters around that in the throne speech or in the days following. Andrew, I'm sure we'll all have lots to say on it, but I'll start with Andrew because I'm sure this is one of his favorite topics. Do they need a fiscal anchor? Will there be one? What's your anticipation?
In my opinion, they need a fiscal anchor.
Yeah.
They seem to have come to the conclusion that they don't, that we are living in extraordinary times in a couple of dimensions. One is the pandemic that we talked about earlier, and the other is this very low interest rate environment that we're in. To some extent, they're linked, but the interest rates were low even before the pandemic.
Sure.
And so they've come to the conclusion that, well, it's basically free money. We can borrow in as much as we like. We can have the central bank buy much of that debt, and we don't have to worry about inflation because all those old beliefs have no longer apply. Well, for the next 18 months, that's probably true. I think what some of us are concerned about is what happens if the perfect rosy scenario that they're pricing in, where interest rates stay low, inflation stays low, what happens if they're wrong about that and they've taken on all this debt? So it's a bit of another bait and switch. You remember the Liberals first came into power saying we're going to only have very small deficits and then balance the budget, and that turned out not to be true. This time they said we're going to go into debt because there's a pandemic on and we need to have all these programs, these emergency programs. And whoops, now that we're past the initial emergency, now we're going to go into further debt for a lot of programs that are basically just lifelong Liberal dreams that may or may not warrant going into this kind of deficit and this kind of debt.
It might be hard, though, to say what your fiscal anchor is when you don't know what the future holds, right? I mean, that would be sort of my counter to them. It might be hard to set one if you don't really know what's going to happen with the pandemic. Chantal.
I don't disagree with all that Andrew said, except it rests on the premise that we have yet to verify, which may yet turn out to be true, that we're going to see all these Liberal programs that they've always dreamt of, and they're now putting into place. So I'm a bit wary of judging something I have not seen. But I do believe that Aaron O'Toole, up to a point, has taken the deficit issue out of the mix by giving the Globe interview and saying he would do it over 10 years. Because 10 years in the middle of a pandemic, while most people are still in crisis mode, sounds like it's in another life. And I don't think it was I think it was wise of Aaron O'Toole to do that, but I also think that it gets that issue and the Conservatives standing up in the House as they did with Bill Morneau for the past 5 years asking, what is your date to restore fiscal balance? That's gone.
Yeah, it's interesting because it neuters the argument that the Conservatives are going to come in and axe everything and make deep cuts, but it also sort of takes away that line of attack, as you say, for the Liberals. It just makes it, I don't know, a non-issue, Althea, would that be fair to say, or a non-issue for now?
Well, I think what they were trying to do was basically protect themselves defensively on the Liberal oncoming attack that they were going to present an austerity budget, which is what they did to Andrew Scheer when he came out with his fiscal plan during the election, right? Any hint that there would be cuts, oh no, the country's going to have this terrible things will happen, all of your benefits will vanish, and the country will be plunged into dark despair. So that, I think that was actually strategically smart. And now he's talking about 10 years as not the actual date, but the target. So that's perhaps a movable goal. I think because we don't really know what's in the throne speech, like, are there going to be so many programs that there are structural deficits, or are these one-time key investments into transportation, for example, things that will benefit Canadians in the longer term? It may be difficult to have an anchor like we've had, debt to GDP ratio. But I think, Kevin Page talked about this week, the former parliamentary budget officer, that there needs to be some sort of long-term fiscal plan. I think for the Liberals to say that they're a responsible government, to Chantal's point, they do need to present something that doesn't just make them look like they're Santa Claus and they're handing out goodies to everybody.
Yeah, I mean, but we also go ahead, Chantal.
No, but they also need to set a date to present Canadians with a budget.
Yes, well, that's what I was going to say. That the throne speech actually won't have numbers in it. Like we won't really know all these things. Go ahead, Anne.
The fiscal update, they won't even tell us when that's going to be. Like maybe November.
Yeah. Okay, Andrew, go ahead.
So O'Toole's promise is essentially predicated on the same assumptions as the Liberals, which is that interest rates stay at these historic lows, basically as far as the eye can see. If that proves not to be the case, then his promise, along with the Liberal promises, will be out the window, because we will be, if we see a surge in interest rates, a surge in inflation, then we are back into kind of fiscal crisis mode of the kind that we would have seen in the 90s. And with the exception, and this is what makes the situation so concerning, is any previous surge in government spending, surge in government deficit of this dimension, whether you're talking about World War II or the big increase in spending in the 60s, was at a time when we had year after year of rapid economic growth to provide the revenues to pay it down. We are in a period, and going to be in a period for the next several decades, of very slow growth driven by the aging of the population. So we're not going to have that big revenue surge to save the day. So that's what's particularly concerning about this abrupt lurch towards ever larger deficits and debts, is is we have not the first clue at this point how to bring that deficit down.
So just to sum up, though, we would need to see in the throne speech some indication, as Althea hinted at earlier, that there is some sort of program that they have their eyes on that could create a structural deficit. That may not happen. Go ahead, Chantal.
We won't know that. But what we do know is that for all of the valid points that Andrew is making, we are not going to have someone fighting for those points in the next election. And that's on Erin O'Toole, and that is probably what he needs to do.
Well, that's why we have Andrew. Okay. I'm going to wrap it up there. Thank you all. Appreciate it. And I'll see you next week. Thank you.